Right now, inside India's borders, an unchecked civil war is burning. Over the past 3 years, the violence has claimed more than 250 lives and reduced 10,000 homes to ash. The human toll is staggering. In 2023 alone, 97% of all internal displacement across South Asia happened in this single state, with thousands of families still languishing in makeshift relief camps. Despite the heavy presence of the Indian Army and central paramilitary forces, the state remains fractured into deeply hostile territories. These are essentially uncrossable zones, guarded by armed personnel and civilian militias alike. To understand why these borders were drawn and why this conflict is so difficult to solve, we must look closely at Manipur's physical terrain. Manipur's 3D topography resembles a stadium. The central Imphal Valley makes up just 10% of the land, surrounded by rugged mountains. This dictates demographics. The Meitei majority are packed into the tiny valley, while the surrounding hills house the tribal Kuki and Naga populations. When you have the vast majority of the population squeezed into such a small central space, any shift in the surrounding mountains creates immediate friction. It's a spatial mismatch that leaves very little room for error. The foundation for this divide was laid by British colonial rulers. Because the plains were easier to control and more economically active, the British governed the valley directly, but largely left the hill tribes alone to manage themselves, driving a permanent administrative wedge between the communities. Even when India gained independence, integration wasn't smooth. In 1949, the central government placed the King of Manipur under house arrest until he signed a merger agreement, officially transferring control of the state's defense and communications to India. The legal foundation for the modern crisis was established in 1960 with the introduction of the Manipur Land Reform Act. This map illustrates the law's core restriction. Métis residents are strictly prohibited from purchasing land in the hill districts. Conversely, the law allows the hill tribes to buy property anywhere within the state, including inside the Central Valley. This legislation hard-coded the physical geography into law. For generations, it fueled anxiety among the Métis that their population was growing while their available land remained permanently capped, creating the feeling of being demographically squeezed. Those deep-seated insecurities over land rights and cultural preservation quickly militarized. Fiercely protective armed ethno-nationalist groups began forming across all three populations. Looking at the territorial claims, you can see the conflict. The Nagas demand a unified Greater Nagaland, while the Kukis want their own separate state of Kukiland. At same time, Meitei insurgencies fought to resist Indian state control entirely, and as these zones light up, you can see how directly the Kuki and Naga homeland claims overlap. These overlapping borders have a history of bloodshed, like the 1993 massacre known as Kuki Black Day. Decades of violence have left communities highly suspicious of one another, relying heavily on armed civilian militias to defend their borders. Which brings us to the trigger point in 2023. The Meitei community petitioned for scheduled tribe status. This legal classification would allow them to purchase property in the surrounding hills. For the Kuki population, this was viewed as an existential threat. They feared that if the politically dominant Meitei majority gained ST status, it would rapidly lead to the erosion of Kuki ancestral lands. When the High Court ordered the state to consider granting the status, it ignited decades of unresolved ethnic paranoia. Within hours, the entire state plunged back into full-scale, devastating armed conflict. Today, the situation is a massive, violent stalemate. The state government has effectively lost administrative control, and the suspension of operation agreements, which historically kept over 24 militant groups in check, are rapidly unraveling. Local trust in the administration has completely evaporated. Citizens from multiple factions have taken to the streets, openly demanding the immediate resignation of the chief minister. In an attempt to maintain a grip on the state, authorities have deployed draconian measures. They've expanded the UAPA law, allowing police to make arrests purely on suspicion, while enforcing the longest internet blackout in India's history to stop visuals of the violence from spreading. Meanwhile, the response from the central government has been defined by its absence. While the violence raged and casualties mounted, the prime minister remained silent for months, opting not to visit the state. At the exact same time, the government managed to deploy thousands of central troops to manage political optics and secure elections in states like West Bengal, all while quietly relocating security forces out of Manipur. Left to fend for themselves, desperate local citizens have stepped up. Women's groups, in particular, have organized massive, nocturnal rallies, marching through the streets with torches to demand basic accountability and protection. The crisis in Manipur shows what happens when historical grievances are met with official silence. In the absence of political intervention, the state drifted into a cycle of zero trust and localized warfare that feels almost impossible to break.